All righty. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for coming to this Trail of Souls. This is a very important event in the life, not only of our diocese, but also of our church and among all who are people of faith. It was several years ago that the General Convention of the Episcopal Church encouraged all the dioceses to research their histories of systemic racism, slavery, Jim Crow, segregation. The Diocese of Maryland took that seriously. And we broke ground last year, in May 11 of last year, 2019, exactly 400 years after Africans were first brought to these shores as slaves, as enslaved persons. On May 11 of last year, our diocese voted to affirm the principle of reparations, repairing the breach, repairing the damage caused by 400 years of systemic slavery, racism, and oppression. And then in June of last year, I also testified before Congress for HR 40, that bill that's been introduced so many years by Representative Conyers. That bill called for the establishment of a bipartisan committee to study reparations and make recommendations for what that would mean for America. And then in September of this year, the diocese broke ground again by establishing a fund of $1 million to fund initiatives for the uplift of the impoverished Black community in recognition of the fact that our church has benefited financially and materially from slavery and racism. And after centuries of taking monies out of the Black community, we, in our sorrow and on our excitement to do something about that, want to invest in the Black community. So that's what brings us to today. And again, so very happy that you are here. I'm going to begin us with a prayer, and then I'm going to turn this over to Canon Chris McLeod. Let us pray. O God of justice and compassion, as we gather today in remembrance of those who suffer from violence, injustice, and systemic racism, we understand that we struggle not merely against flesh and blood, but against powers and principalities in high places, those institutions and systems that keep racism alive by perpetuating the lie that some members of our family are superior to others. Create in us today a new mind and heart that will enable us to see brothers and sisters in the faces of those divided by our racial categories. Give us the grace and strength to rid ourselves of all sorts of oppressions which provide entitlements to some and oppress others. And help us to create today a city in Baltimore, a state in Maryland, and a nation that embraces the hopes and fears of all the people in all our communities, as well as those around the world, as has been sung in that great hymn that sustained the Black community for generations. O God of our weary years, God of our silent tears, thou who hast brought us thus far on the way, thou who hast by thy might led us into thy light, keep us forever in the path, we pray. Amen.
Thank you, Bishop Sutton. Good morning, everyone. I am Chris McLeod. I am your canon for mission in the Diocese of Maryland, and we are so happy to have you all here with us this morning as we continue our conversation and discussion on reparations. The bishop gave us a pretty good overview about what we're trying to do today. I just want to be mindful to bring up a couple of points. One, our session is being recorded. We should always make that announcement at the beginning. So just so you understand, this session is being recorded. So those who might want to catch this later on can do so. Additionally, again, just to emphasize what Grace said earlier, please put all comments only in the chat box. Please put all questions in the Q&A box. It allows us to keep track of the questions and to be able to address them as they come in effectively, much better effectively. With that, one other thing. We are in tender times, my brothers and sisters. As you know, the days as we lead up to our election things are tense and things are, feelings and emotions are all over the place. And so let's just be mindful that we are the body of Christ in the world, and that we are here to not only continue our work and advocacy for all those who are disadvantaged in one way or another, but that we pray deeply and heartily between now and our election day on Tuesday. With that, I have the privilege of introducing our first guest speaker, Kondwani Fidel. Kondwani Fidel is one of our sons of Baltimore. Kondwani has been known and has been featured in the Washington Post, the Atlantic, CNN, The Root, The Independent, and Mike in the Baltimore Sun. His viral essay, How a Young Boy Has Been Decaying in Baltimore Since Age 10, a Death Note, cemented Kondwani as an authority in the city of Baltimore. He's also the author of published collections called Hummingbirds in the Trenches, Raw Wounds, and his forthcoming book, The Antiracist, How to Start the Conversation and Take Action. He has been praised by literary and civil rights giants such as Dr. Ibram Kendi, Ebel Ewing, and DeRay McKesson. And I will let Kondwani share any other information that he'd like as he goes along. And so I'm going to turn this over to you, Kondwani.
Thank you so much for that introduction. I just want to say thanks to all the attendees, that are here with us. I'm forever grateful whenever I get invited to share my voice, whenever I get invited to, be a part of someone else's community, even if it's for a day. And I'm here to learn just as much as you all are. So I'm going to start off with this poem that I wrote called I Will Tell Them. I grew up in East Baltimore. My mother was pregnant with me 92. I was born 93. She struggled with heroin addiction and crack addiction. And, my father was struggling with heroin addiction as well. So my grandmother had adopted me when I was an infant. So, she took me under her wing, and that was my parent, my guardian. Like, her name is on my birth certificate. And, I always had this disconnect with my mother growing up, because I remember I was like 4 years old and I knew, what getting high was, or, what drugs, were, or what junkies were, you know what I'm saying, in the lamest terms, because that's what we call people like my mother. And up until, I was an adult, nobody really told me the things that my mother was going through was a symptom of systemic oppression. They always made it seem like she was a monster, she was a bad person, and it wasn't the thing that was taking over this good person. So I grew to hate my mother for a long portion of my life, until I went to college and I graduated and I started reading more about systemic oppression and drug addiction and drug abuse, and how drug addiction is a mental health issue. It's not a criminal issue. And I just felt so slighted, because no one told me, the truth behind what was going on in my life. And my mother still gets high to this day. And she got a 4-year-old daughter. I got a 4-year-old little sister, and they're going through. And I'm the oldest of 6, so they're going through the same things that I was going through when I was their age. And I said that I was going to make it my duty to be honest with them about my feelings, about, what I went through growing up, dealing with her drug addiction, her stealing from me, her crushing my heart multiple times at a time. But I was like, I would be doing a disservice to my mother, to everyone else in this world who struggles with drug addiction. And I would be doing a disservice to my siblings if I don't be honest with them about the political side of, why, she is the way that she is. So we can blame the thing and try to fight and conquer the thing and not the thing that just took over this person. So this poem is called I Will Tell Them. Since all of our lives are already planned out, there was an expiration date on your sobriety that only God knew, that I wish he could have prepped me for. For too many moons, America has been lying to Black children. So if any of your kids, my younger siblings, ever come to me and ask what was life like growing up, I will tell them the truth. Some days the pendulum will swing in your favor, and on others it will swing in the favor of your opposite. And every time God gives you a gift, even if it's a smile on your worst days, pocket it, save it, put it in a safe place, deposit it. Make sure you only have access because your happiness should only be handled by you. Don't give your happiness to a soul, because what happens when they touch it, when they drop it or they crush it, they will trade it for likes and cheap retweets. They will drag your happiness through the streets, I promise you. They will. I will tell them at times I used to sit alone and wonder, how does it feel to carry burnt glass tubes stuffed with still wool and pills of dope in the same purse you keep pictures of your children, your boys and girls, in the same company of the boy and girl? I will tell them, in this family, addiction gets handed over like hand-me-down coats, too big, but you wear it on your shoulder blades, burdens, so heavy that you hunchback, so mean that you mug. Biggie, give me the loot before I shoot, bad boys be the family. I ignored the voices that tried to keep me out of murky waters. The outcome, I got baptized in a Bacardi Beck. I lost eons of races in a rum river. While I was drowning, I grabbed the goose by its neck and annihilated it like I had a kidney made of chromium. Many nights when I couldn't see, I opted to clear my mind, strapped up my goggles and doggy paddled in the black Hennessy. I will tell them all wounds don't heal with time and all problems can't be fixed with tequila and lime. I will tell them about the days I used to blast the song Hey Mama by this guy called West. Then after every relapse, all that was left was a Tribe Called Stress. I had a dream I could buy your way to heaven. When I awoke, I spent it on rounds at the club. I bargained my liver in exchange for the erasure of painful memories. But all it did was make me bring your name up in bars over toasts and shots with strangers. Always leaving teary-eyed in the morning after. I always feel the strangers when I scrape together bits of pieces of the night before. My Lord, I let my demons gas me up and it left my love tank on E. I will tell them what it feels like to crawl on miles of cut glass just to get to the end of the road with bloody palms and kneecaps. Scars to remind you that you made it. Scars to remind you that you're human. Scars to remind you that you're strong while your favorite victory song plays in your head and you celebrate. Only to find out you went the wrong way. Plot twist. So the question becomes, do you crawl back or stay? Plot twist. You're stuck drowning in quicksand. You close your eyes and allow the sinking to take place. You believe in God, right? So why you questioning fate? Ask yourself. It's enough people out here sharing Hallmark stories, so I gotta keep spitting it from the heart. Even if the critics gossip and label it dark, I'm not here to discuss happy-go-lucky when the system is trying to bump me. Why would I concern myself with name brand belts and band-aids when there's a plague in the land that's man-made? I will tell them about every emotion I went through, because what's the point of having feelings if you can't get in them? But I'd be continuing a dangerous cycle if I don't keep it a stack about how I progressed during my process. I will tell them as I became wiser and older, I realized why mommy was rarely sober. See, when mommy was coming up back in the day, Reagan used coke and dope as roadblocks to run her astray. Everybody from the media to friends to family made me believe that mommy was my enemy, a monster. So my entire adolescence was filled with aggression towards her and not the oppressors. And these poems are just tears that I couldn't afford to shed back then. I will tell them the war on drugs was a war on us, and mommy was one of billions on the receiving end of the trigger. I will tell them that the system never has nor will try to produce functional, self-sufficient Black adults in this country. It's designed to keep us in boxes in the form of caskets, prison cells, and Jordans. And no matter how far you, and no matter how poor, they make sure we can afford them. I will tell them being Black ain't cheap. It comes with a lot of fees written in fine print. In poverty, drug addiction is a lottery. And people with a chocolate who hit the jackpot for pain when they don't even play the numbers. That's how mommy got scratched off. This world will give you a treasure chest of dreams, but won't give you the key to take the latch off. I will tell them, in life, we all take left turns and we'll need help getting on the right track. So be careful of who you turn your back to The thought of judgment day might seem scary, but your years of sin will not exempt you from kicking back on heaven's resort. I will tell them, Asada Shakur said it best. I believe that a lost ship, steered by tired, seasick sailors, can still be guided home to port. I will tell them. Thank y'all for listening.
Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Kondwani.
Kondwani.
Thank y'all.
That was very powerful. Very, very powerful. Right now, Reverend Gray is going to have a dialogue with you about your book, Antiracist, and growing up in Baltimore. So, Gray.
Thanks, Chris, and thanks again, Kondwani, for that. I'll go ahead and put a link in the chat to purchase Kondwani's most recent book of poetry, Hummingbirds in the Trenches. You can also get it at Greedy Reads or Red Emma's here in Baltimore, but certainly well worth your attention. And this is the book that The Antiracist is his book, which you can see behind him on the bookshelf. So the first question I want to ask Kondwani, you grew up in Baltimore. You had a very different upbringing than I did, than most people on this call did. And in your book, you talk a lot about the challenges and difficulties of growing up in this city and the reality of systemic racism and how it impacted you as a youth, as a kid, as an artist, as a brother. So, but I want to ask first, is Baltimore beautiful to you?
Oh yeah, most definitely. Baltimore, when you're living here, growing up here, and you don't really have too much connection to the outside world, that's, outside of your neighborhood, outside of the city, you love the place because this is where your friends are, your family, this is where you laugh, this is where you play, this is where you learn about the passions that you want to pursue in life. And yeah, we go through a lot, when it comes to violence and it comes to systemic oppression, and that stuff affects, everyone, who's dealing with it. But I feel like that you don't start, having these negative thoughts about Baltimore until people force you to have these negative thoughts about Baltimore. And, if you ask me, Baltimore is the epicenter of progression in this country. And that's an all-encompassing term in regards to the good, bad, and the ugly. Like Baltimore spearhead a lot of progression in this country. That's why we call it the city of first. And, I feel like we don't get enough credit to how we contribute to America's rich culture. And not to say that, we do it for credit, but that lack of credit and that lack of acknowledgement, turns into narratives about our city that don't describe, who we are as a whole. For too many moons, Baltimore has been buried under mainstream media numbers, polls, which only highlight the symptoms of systemic oppression and not the core issues or ways to, solve these issues, and that's just flagrant. So them magnifying that negativity is, harmful propaganda, and it creates a false image of what we mean and who we are here in Baltimore. And, the trials and tribulations that I went through, being a 27-year-old, dude who has his MFA, I wear all of my trials and tribulations on my chest like a badge. It's kind of like, surviving basic training in a sense, and there's beauty in all struggles if you look for it. And I'm glad that I was able to find a beauty in mine. And, I put that beauty into my words. I put it into my books. And, I believe that Baltimore is one of the most beautiful places in the world. We just get a bad rap, and we're told to fear certain neighborhoods and certain groups of people, where, America conditions us to hate one another, But if you go outside of that and just really, see the humanity in people, then, then everybody will love Baltimore.
Thanks. So building off that, I think, at least in the church, when it comes to work in cities, we often kind of narratives of, well, let's go in and find the good kids and help them succeed. Can you maybe talk a little bit about, and no offense, but growing up, you were not what would normally be described as a good kid, right? And not by your own fault, but just in terms of the kind of ways that you earned money and had fun and everything else. So can you talk about the myth of the good Black kid and maybe where churches and others should focus their energy when working with youth in the city?
I feel like that, the term good is subjective because, I was considered a good kid because I got good grades in school. You know what I'm saying? But I still sold drugs like a lot of my peers. You know what I'm saying? And you got some people that aren't good in school and they're considered bad kids. So it's like, I feel like that's on the individual to interpret what's their definition of good. But I would say that it's hard finding the good Black kids. Let me say this. So in these communities, right, in these neighborhoods, in the hearts of these people, the order, the clarity, the beauty, the happiness that's in their landscape, where these young Black kids live in Baltimore, and that clarity, that beauty, that happiness that's tapped inside of their heart, that's tapped in their humanity, you know what I'm saying? The characteristics of their nature are at odds with the menacing jungle that are in the people's heads who consume and produce racist ideas about these people. So even if you do see a young Black kid, he might exude all of the behaviors of your white son. You know what I'm saying? But in your mind, you're gonna be like, nah, this not right. This don't feel like what CNN was pushing. This don't feel like what Fox 45 was pushing. Like, he's a good kid, but it's like you just keep going back and forth. You know what I'm saying? And I mean, even if you use traditional Black stereotypes or any stereotypes, they all are formed around misinformation and misdirection, and Baltimore has never had a good media run. The media focus on crime when there's crime in every city. And, it's always, the commentary is always from people who don't live here, people who have no real solutions to get to the core problems. And that's not to say that we don't need to highlight those social justice issues. That's what majority of my work consists of. However, that's not who we are entirely. So, people, that there's not enough good Black kids in this city, that's a racist idea. And if you're saying, finding the good Black kids, which mean that there are bad Black kids, and if you're saying that it's majority bad Black kids, then you're saying that it's a majority bad group of people, which is a racist idea. And that's something that you got to confront, and you got to ask yourself, why do you consider these kids bad? And if you blame it on crime, then look at the disparities when it comes to unemployment in these neighborhoods. And if you're relating it to violence, and homicides, look at the politics and the laws that's in place that consider some things violent crimes and some things that aren't violent crimes. And you got white people who get off the hook for committing murders, which should be violent crimes but aren't. So it's like, whenever you find yourself speaking bad or saying that there's something wrong with a group of people, that is a racist idea or sexist idea or whatever the ism is, you know what I'm saying? Because there's nothing wrong with any group of people. And if you think that it is, then you just need to do more research and find out, why these problems are existing and the magnitude that they are.
Thanks. I want to get to the disparities in sentencing that you just mentioned, but first I want to talk a little bit more about systemic racism. In the poem that you shared at the beginning, there was a beautiful line, which I won't attempt to recreate, but you talked about how you directed all this anger that should have been directed at this system that was designed to oppress and Black people in Baltimore, and directed it at your mother. Mm-hmm. Do you think that how aware are most Black Baltimore residents of the realities of systemic racism, systemic oppression, and what is that like for you?
I feel like for me growing up, like you knew that the police were racist because things would get physical. Like you got beat up, you got stomped out. Some people got shot, some people got killed. You get harassed, you get guns poured out on you. So that's like direct racism. That's easy to identify. You chilling on the front with your grandmother and the police roll up and body slam you for no reason and lock you up for no reason. You understand what I'm saying? So that's easy to identify. But the systemic oppression that happens inside the city schools, you know, with you know, in the communities we live, the food deserts, you know, the dark history of experimentations on Black people at John Hopkins hospitals. You know what I'm saying? These are the things that aren't so much direct, that they're not direct. You know what I'm saying? So a lot of times I believe that people don't really see those as systemic issues. And, you know, every time that something happens to Black people, you know, everybody, including, you know, some Black people, they blame Black people. And that's the way that America wants us to operate. You know what I'm saying? To teach us the true history about this country, to teach us the true history about Black ancestors, to teach us the true history about white people and their ancestors would go against the bottom line of America. And that bottom line is to promote racial conformity, is to, you know, keep people in boxes, is to, you know, make Black people believe that it's something wrong with them. And we you know, consume those ideas every day. And you know, that's why when I started reading more and I'm you know, learning these numbers and I'm learning the history, and I'm like, wow, like they really did a great job at making us believe that there's something wrong with us. Because I always, you know, for a large part of my childhood, I thought that there was something wrong with my mother. I thought there was something wrong with a lot of the people in my community, because nobody taught me like how we got here. We just thought that it was something extraordinary about white people, and we thought that it was something wrong with Black people, which isn't true. The white people in this country, they have, you know, they just have, you know, superior opportunities in this country, and Black people got more inferior opportunities in this country, and that's all that it is.
So it sounds like, you know, that from your last two responses, that there really is an onus on us as communities of faith to make ourselves aware of that systemic racism and be able to educate ourselves and see what's going on beyond just the individual incident of a crime or a drug deal or something else.
Absolutely, because even when you look at you know, a Black person committing a crime, it's like that's the norm. That's normative for Black people. You know what I'm saying? And we get put into a box. And again, because America is so good at propaganda, they created this image of all Black people. But when a white person does something, it's like, oh, they're not like the others. You know what I'm saying? Like that was a mistake. You know what I'm saying? Like criminality for Black people in this country is the rule. And criminality for white people in this country is the exception.
So you talk in your book about disparities in sentencing and how it impacts communities, and you explicitly talk about you know, a case that obviously is very personal and painful to this community, comparing the lifetime sentence that Donta Harris got in Baltimore County for running over a police officer with the relatively short sentence that Heather Cook got for drunk driving on Roland Avenue.
Absolutely.
And you know, and that's something that we as a community have struggled with ourselves, and particularly as folks who you know, on the one hand believe that less incarceration is better, but also keenly aware that there's an inequality here. What is that inequality? To talk more about that inequality in sentencing and how it's, you know, how you have experienced and processed that.
It's kind of something that I just learned to deal with. Because at first, you know, you would see someone get different sentences for committing essentially the same crime. And you know, and you'll ask those questions like, oh, why is that? Why is that? But, you know, after reading and researching and just understanding the history of America in itself, you know what I'm saying? These white people who get off the hook, you know, they have one asset that always have worked for them on a global scale, and that is their whiteness. And it's undeniable, because if you got you know, former Bishop Heather Cook, you know, she you know, got sentenced to manslaughter, DUI, leaving the scene of an accident, texting and driving, you know what I'm saying? And that wasn't her first DUI. And in 2010, she was charged with multiple offenses, including possession of marijuana and DUI, you know, for which she received probation before judgment and a $300 fine, you know, and then she was released early in 2019 because she had earned credits for good behavior. She's an adult. She knew what she was doing, you know what I'm saying? But on the other hand, it's a 17-year-old child who you know, who was sentenced to life in prison for hitting somebody with a car who was probably scared. And it's like, a lot of times, you know, racist ideas make us, you know, view teenage, you know, Black kids as adults when they're not, you know what I'm saying? And that boy should not have got you know, life in prison. If people like Heather, who are repeated offenders, aren't getting life in prison. And you know, I mentioned it in my book. I talk about I referenced Dr. Ibram X. Kendi book, Stand from the Beginning. And, you know, in it, he says, you know, drunk drivers who routinely kill people, kill more people than violent urban Blacks were not regarded as violent crimes in such studies. And 78% of arrested drunk drivers were white males in 1990. In 1986, 1,092 people succumbed to cocaine-related deaths, right? And there were another 20,610 homicides. That adds up to 21,702, which is still lower than the 23,990 alcohol-related traffic-related deaths that year, not to mention a number of serious injuries, you know, caused by those drunk drivers that didn't result in death, right? White drunk drivers were killing other white people at a far greater rate than those violent Black faces that only existed on people's television screens and in their imaginations. So in other words, racist ideas bamboozled the masses. Inner city streets were safer than suburban highways where innocent bystanders were being murdered. But there was a war on crime and drugs and not a war on drunk driving. And it shows that when J. Edgar Hoover and, you know, everyone who supported his messages in regard to eradicating crime, it was not to eradicate crime, it was to eradicate Black people. And there's so many situations like that that we can be pulling up for years about, you know, the disparities in these systems. And again, you know, these problems aren't exclusively Black people's problems, but it's disproportionately our problems.
Thanks for that. And so I want to go to the end of your book. You talk about Baltimore ceasefire, and a number of folks from the diocese have been involved in this in different ways. Our Canon of the Ordinary, Scott Slater, who's on this call, leads prayer walks every ceasefire weekend, and next weekend following the election is the fall Baltimore ceasefire weekend. Can you talk a little bit about, you mentioned this as radical and groundbreaking in your book. Can you talk about why Baltimore ceasefire is significant and how you think, you know, churches and others can get involved in it?
So I'm gonna tell y'all, right? When I first heard of Baltimore ceasefire, I'm like, it's people running around screaming, don't shoot nobody. I'm like, what? I'm like, that gotta be the dumbest thing that I ever heard in my life. I'm like, if it was that easy, then nobody would be getting shot. You know what I'm saying? If like you could just say, hey, stop shooting, then the guy with the gun, like, okay. You know what I'm saying? Like it just seemed weird to me until I actually went out to one of the weekends, and you know, I swallowed those words because I seen what was going on there with the community. And you know, I spoke with Erica Bridgeford, and she's, you know, a good friend of mine now. And she was just, and I told her exactly what I told y'all, and she was like, yo, you know, it's not to stop all of the murders from happening, because it's not going to happen. Like when we talk about foundations, like America's foundation was built off of murder and exploitation. In order for these foundations to stay intact, it has to keep doing what it did to get built. You can't put milk in a car and expect it to go. No, it was built for gas. America's, if and what Dave Chappelle say, if America is a car, and like, black bodies are premium gas or something like that. And so Erica was saying like, yo, that's not my goal, because we know that this is going to continue to happen unless like some real, change just, happens that fast, which, isn't, it isn't practical, you know what I'm saying? But she was like, what we can do is condition and to train people how to deal with the trauma of losing loved ones to violent deaths, which is something that's not taught, right? Like these toxic ways to deal with trauma is passed down. In my neighborhood, when somebody get murdered, we cry our eyes out, till our tear ducts dry. We smoke some weed, we go to the liquor store, you know what I'm saying? We get drunk, pour the liquor on the curb, we talk about it, we cry more, buy more liquor, smoke more tobacco, you know what I'm saying? And that's not healthy at all. And those things get passed down, because I'm not the first person that took on that ritual when I'm losing a loved one to a violent murder. That's what my father did, and that's what his father did. You understand what I'm saying? So she was telling me, if those can get passed down, then more revolutionary ways to deal with this trauma can get passed down too. If it's meditation, if it's talking to people, if it's showing up for people, turning these murder scenes into spiritual ground, and I'm pretty sure, I'm butchering, all of what Erica Bridgefoot stands for, but she definitely, made me, get more into the spirituality of things. And again, it just shows how I was ignorant. You understand? I was ignorant, and I had no problem voicing that ignorance to a person who probably, in another world, or another person probably would have cursed me out. You know what I'm saying? If I'd say that I thought that their organization and that message was BS. But you know what I'm saying? Because she loved people, and she want people to grow. She didn't scold me. She didn't call me names. She's like, come here, young brother. Let me really school you. You know what I'm saying? And while I'm on that, in us who understand these things, we have to give those ignorant people more grace, because everybody doesn't know. You know what I'm saying? As many times as I got locked up as a kid for stuff that I didn't do, I didn't know what mass incarceration was, and when I first heard about it, I didn't believe that it was a real thing. I didn't know what my constitutional rights were, although they were getting violated daily. You know what I'm saying? So I believe that if y'all want to help Erica Bridgefoot, you know what I'm saying, y'all should hit her up and ask her what she needs. You know what I'm saying? I don't want to speak for her, but just for the people who aren't really familiar with her, get involved. She got a TED Talk. She got several other things online. She's always having stuff outside where you could just like pull up on it and get to learn more about it.
Thanks, Kondwani. I'm gonna ask one more question, then turn it over to Chris, who's got some questions from the community here to offer.
Okay.
And this is, you're an artist, you're creative, you're a poet, you understand deeply, what it means to create community and rebuild communities. Can you talk a little bit about, the idea of reparations and what we talk in the church a lot about, the need to repair the breach. There's this line from Isaiah that we're called to be repairers of the breach, restorers of the streets that we live in. And can you talk a little bit about what repairing relationship looks like between white Baltimore and Black Baltimore, and more broadly, not just here in Baltimore, but around the country?
I would say that we have to speak to these people in these communities and figure it out. It was this girl, an artist on Twitter, and she was saying, if you do any work around Black liberation and you don't explicitly address capitalism, then you're not doing real Black liberation work, right? And I'm like, who gassed this girl up so much to make her the police of Black liberation? Like, sure, you probably never even been to Baltimore a day in your life. You probably never been to Chicago a day in your life. So who are you to tell those people what's Black liberation for them? You got to ask those people. Some people get on soapbox and say, oh, Black people, we don't want money for reparations. We want yada, yada, yada. And I'm like, nah, bro, I want some money too. You know what I'm saying? Like, reparations can come in many different forms. It can come with teaching the students the truth about their history and where they come from. And you know, when you in these classrooms, not making everything centered around whiteness, you know what I'm saying, and being really diverse, like that can be reparations. Making sure that people who come from these communities get scholarships to go to college so they don't got to take out no loans. That can be reparations. A check can be reparations. You understand what I'm saying? Like, giving people resources and access to opportunities that they wouldn't come across in their everyday lives is reparations. You know what I'm saying? But you know, even in my book, The Antiracist, I talk about all of these things, and I talk about you know, just not policing Black liberation. Like, you got to ask those people what they want. I can tell you what I want, and again, right, is Black people always get put into a box. Like, how, like, I can't speak for every Black person in this city and what reparations look like for them. Nor, and I shouldn't seek to do that. You understand what I'm saying? Because nobody says, hey, what does, you know, what should we do for white, you know, Baltimoreans as a whole? And it's like they don't get treated, you know, with that same type of language, I feel like. And you know, as far as giving back, you know, I speak about it a lot in my book, and I have several examples. If it's with Brittany Young, who has the B360 organizations, and she loves dirt bikes and she's against street riding. But what she does is she take these young Black kids, and she basically she studies STEM, and she understands that these young kids are literally like natural born engineers. They can put bikes together, they can break them down, they can do whatever they want with them. So around the time that Freddie Gray was murdered, she came across some information stating that, you know, it wasn't a lot of young Black people who were getting jobs in the STEM world. So now she's that pipeline from the streets, from the hood, to the STEM careers. And she got like robotics classes, and she's really teaching them and making them more aware of the genius that they hold. You understand what I'm saying? I got a friend named Cool Ant who he went to Archbishop Curley, wrestled, played football, always fit, always a community guy. And he said when the pandemic started, he came across some information and he saw that Black people were disproportionately dying from COVID, but because of pre-existing conditions and them living in food deserts and, you know, healthy eating not really being a part of certain, you know, neighborhoods, and that's why people are dying. So he started a run club based off of that, and he had people every Tuesday all around the city coming on Biddle Street, and they ran downtown and they ran back. He provided food for them, he provided healthy drinks for them, and then out of that, him and some other guys had started this organization called Building Bodies and Bonds, and these are a group of professional trainers. Like, they get paid to train people, but they take people from the community every day. They go up Lake Montebello, and they train them. They work out together, and it's like, that's how you combat racism. Like with Brittany Young doing, that's how you combat racism. With Erica Bridgefoot doing, that's how you combat racism. What I'm doing in city schools, that's how I combat racism. Everybody not going to be the Martin Luther King. Everybody not going to be on the front lines. It was some people that had to make the flyers. It was some people that was driving state to state to drop people off. You know what I'm saying? So they could be at these rallies. So when we thinking about ways to give back, it's like, you know, stay in your lane. What you good at? What's your privilege? What you got access to, right? Like, I'm not about to be you know, this fitness juggernaut. You know what I'm saying? When the only exercise, you know, I partake in is is walking and, you know, raising glasses to my mouth like this. Like, that's not my field. But books and literature is my thing. And you got a thing, and you got a thing, and everybody got a thing. So it's like, find out what your thing is and see how you can help give that to other people who aren't, you know, afforded it. Like, it's that simple. A lot of times we psych ourselves out by thinking that it's too hard to help people, and like asking like, oh, I don't know what to do. Just sit down and just think about what you're good at, you know, come up with some quantifiable goals. And, you know, that mustard seed, you know, is extremely small, but then it's going to branch out into an organization like B360 or like Baltimore Ceasefire, or like any other organization in this country that does good work. You know what I'm saying? It started out as an idea and it turned into a movement, you know. And even if your movement don't end up, you know, being 100,000 plus people, you know what I'm saying? When you die, you got to answer, you know, to God for the way that you was living here on earth. You know what I'm saying? And you can't fool him, and you can't fool yourself. You could fool me, you know what I'm saying? But you know what you got to offer. You know what you know, it's people out there that need help. And just, you know, just watching people struggle when you have something that can benefit them. You know what I'm saying? We gotta go back and interrogate that. You know what I'm saying? And we all got space to grow. You know what I'm saying? Growth isn't a one-stop shop. It's not a one-size-fit-all solution. It's constant reevaluating yourself. It's constantly asking questions. It's constantly being wrong. You understand what I'm saying? And yeah, I feel like, well, you know, when we start to understand that and think that way, then helping people won't be as hard as we make it seem.
Kondwani, I know that we're all remote, but I just want you to know that if we were in the cathedral, you'd have 150 people on their feet clapping right now. That was just, thank you so much for sharing that. And I apologize to anyone from my congregation listening to this, because my sermon is not going to be as good tomorrow. But I'm gonna hand it over to Chris, and she's gonna offer some questions from the chat.
Okay.
Kondwani, thank you so much for that very powerful witness. And for all of our participants, please look in the chat box. Canon Scott has put in, there is a ceasefire prayer walk next Saturday. This is an opportunity for you to join. And Kondwani, you have just now been added to our Sutton Scholars invitation list. We have a group of young people that need to hear your voice, just like we've had Erica. So I'm going to try to get to as many of these questions before we reach our 11 o'clock hour. From Scott, the question that he asked is, what are systemic changes to help give young men and women other options for connecting other than joining a gang?
Can you repeat that one more time, please?
What are systemic changes that to help give young men and young women other options for connection other than, say, like joining a gang?
I would say that so in my book, the Antiracist, it's crazy because I explicitly speak about that. And I feel like we need people in these positions, these leadership positions, to actually reflect the people that they are trying to reach. You know what I'm saying? Like I said all the time, you know, when I was young, I was turned off to politics at a very young age because none of these people were running for office. We didn't listen to the same music. You never seen any of these people in the neighborhood unless they were taking photo ops to act like they care. They didn't shop at the same places that we did. They didn't get groceries from the same places that we did. So I would say that, we were local. I mean, we were ignorant to local politics, but it didn't take rocket science to see that it wasn't a political party to represent our interests. You know what I'm saying? So what we did was we rallied behind one another. You know what I'm saying? We roamed the streets that conceived us, and we took ownership of public spaces, and we stole valuable items from those who had plenty, and we created our own laws and delegated representatives in our neighborhood who we saw fit. You know what I'm saying? It wasn't no love for kids like us on a big screen, on newspapers, on books. So we found that love and loyalty in one another. You know, like growing up, everybody wanted to speak for us, not to us, not with us, but about us. And we never was offered a seat at the table. So I feel like that relatability piece is important. Even the reason that I became a reader and a writer was because I had a professor who engaged me in literature in a way that was relatable to my social context and my experiences growing up in Baltimore. You know what I'm saying? So I feel like we got to relate to these kids and we got to show them that we can. How do we show them that we can? From the films that we showed them in class, from the books that we introduced them to, from the way that we treat them on the streets. You know what I'm saying? Like even if you look at you know what happened to Freddie Gray, like everybody was so distraught when after Freddie Gray died and wanted to, you know, start all these movements. But it's like if Freddie Gray was alive and he came up to you and asked you, you know, could you help him with his resume? Was you gonna turn your nose up at him? You know what I'm saying? Walk on the other side of the street? Like, what we talking about? You know, and it's traditional for us to get treated this way and, you know, fall into gangs because that's where the love is. You know what I'm saying? For us. And everybody in this world want to be loved. Everybody in this world want to find a lover. Everybody in this world want to be happy. And, you know, everybody in this world want some type of community. So sometimes, you know, we got to create our own communities. And yeah, again, I'm gonna just keep going back to that relatability piece. Like we gotta relate to the youth more, and we gotta show them that we care about their experiences. We gotta show them that their experiences is valuable. You know what I'm saying? Even if we can't connect to all of them, like we really need real diversity. You know, we need real equality in these spaces where these kids are being nourished.
Thank you.
Supposed to be nourished.
From Natalie, she asks, can you speak to systemic oppression versus internalized oppression?
So I feel like the systemic oppression without any truthful context of why these things exist is what creates that internal oppression, right? So imagine, and that's why when I go to these schools and I speak to kids, you know, I try to get them to understand like what they're going through is not their fault. It's too many times when I was a kid and I always thought that everything was my fault, even the relationship that I had with my mother. I'm like, damn, there must be something wrong with me. You understand what I'm saying? So we gotta tell kids the truth. We gotta tell everybody the truth. Like the truth is what we're lacking. And again, we need to be taught the truth about this country, not the falsehoods. So we growing up in some fairy tale land, you know what I'm saying? And Obama can win president, and you know everybody running around crying. You know what I'm saying? Saying, oh, we progressed, and oh, we did this, and oh, you know what I'm saying? This is what Martin Luther King wanted. You know what I'm saying? But it's still people getting murdered by the police on camera for not committing any crimes. You know what I'm saying? So it's like we gotta stop teaching people to live in this fairy tale world. And a lot of people say, oh well, you know, the kids, they too young. They don't need to be discussing this grown business. I'm like, yo, if they dealing with it, then they should, you know, that it should be discussed. It should be taught to them in schools. You know what I'm saying? Everything around them and what's going on, I feel like should be taught in schools. It should be taught by their parents. It should be taught by their mentors, their coaches, whoever. So they won't be growing up being taught to hate themselves, thinking that there's something wrong with Black people, or think there's something wrong with Hispanic people, or you know, if you poor and white and you live in Dundalk, thinking that there's something wrong with y'all, and not being taught the truth. You know what I'm saying? So again, just telling the truth. So you know that internal oppression might not exist if we were taught, you know, why we got here, how we got here. You know what I'm saying? Not saying that, you know, not stop saying things like, you know, racism is over. You know what I'm saying? Or we've making it seem like we progress so much when we haven't. So again, just honesty.
Thank you. From Herschel, he asks, how do you perceive the role of the church in the Black communities in Baltimore?
So for me, it was always weird growing up because I went to Catholic school, and I went to St. Elizabeth. Then that got shut down, and we merged with Our Lady of Pompeii, and I graduated from what turned out to be Archbishop Borders. So it's like I had two different experiences, you know, with the Catholic Church and the Baptist Church, and I would say that the churches in the Black community, for me, they provide a structure for people who who probably wouldn't have found it elsewhere, if that makes sense. You know, I know a lot of people who were lost in their lives, and, you know, they ran to the church for help and ended up providing a structure for them that they didn't know that they needed, that changed their entire lives around. You know what I'm saying? And you know, it prepared them for that next chapter of their life. And, you know, that's what I think is the beautiful thing about all religions. That sense of community, that sense of guidance, that sense of you know, following God's rule, and you know, definitely having that structure, you know, so people, you know, can make better decisions in life.
Fabulous. And our last question, we have about 3 minutes left. From Marjorie, I would be interested in your opinion, Kondwani, about the fact that all mass gun violence is done always almost by white males.
Yeah. Again, you know, I talk about it in my book, The Antiracist. I talk about how, you know, how we're criminalized, how we're dehumanized, you know, when we commit crimes or we commit violence. And, you know, people say like, oh, these Black neighborhoods are more dangerous, you know, than the white neighborhoods. But if you take color away, you understand what I'm saying? Like, it's so many disparities in these neighborhoods, and that's the reason why that violence is happening. And you got these white, you know, these young white boys who are committing these murders, and you know, they're just the exception, and not the rule. It's this quote by Theodore Roosevelt. In 1901, he wrote to his friend Owen Wister, who was an American writer and historian, and he said, "I entirely agree with you that as a race and a mass, Blacks are altogether inferior to whites. I suppose I should be ashamed to say that I take the Western view of the Indian. I don't go so far as to think that the only good Indians are the dead Indians, but I believe 9 out of every 10 are, and I shouldn't like to inquire too closely into the case of the 10th. The most vicious cowboy has more moral principle than the average Indian." And Roosevelt's quote encompasses, you know, why the police in Shelby, North Carolina could buy the 21-year-old white supremacist Dylan Roof Burger King because he hadn't eaten in a couple days. This was hours after his arrest for killing 9 Black churchgoers. And after, they can still label him very quiet, very calm, and note that he was not problematic. You know, Dylan Roof was an agent of the state carrying out his ancestors' plan, which is to eliminate Black life. It's like, we're not taught that. You understand what I'm saying? So that shows, you know, that they bond differently with the people who look like them, and they feel like that they doing the right thing. You know what I'm saying? So when it comes to these mass shootings, especially when it's Black people on the opposite end of the gun, and yeah, it's definitely something that we need to be teaching our kids. It's something that we need to be speaking about more. So it won't be a lot of, oh, why is this happening? Why is this happening? And we can be like, oh, now I understand why this is happening. And then I feel like that'll even make people more aware to what's going on. And then I feel like they can start helping and changing and promoting change early on too.
Thank you so very much for your time, your insights, your willingness to expose who you are. We are proud to have you as a son of Baltimore, for sure. And I'm definitely getting your book this weekend, so I can dive all into that. Unfortunately, we cannot answer all questions, get all questions answered in order for us to keep on time. At this time, we are going to take, excuse me, we are going to take a 10-minute break. We will be regrouping at 10 minutes after 11. And so that we can move forward with our next guest speaker. So please take some time, take a restroom break, go get some more coffee, whatever you need. And please return at 10 minutes after 11. Thank you.
Thank y'all for having me.
Thank you.
On a Sunday evening, I'm looking back over all the years and where I've been, looking at the photographs. I'm remembering you were right there, and you have been ever since. With every page that turns, I see your faithfulness. Ooh, the mountain where I climbed, the valley where I fell, you were there all along. That's the story I'll tell. You brought the pieces together, made me that storyteller. Now I know it is well, it is well. That's the story I'll tell. There were some nights that felt like they would last forever, but you kept me breathing. You were with me right then, and all that you have done for me, I can never hold it in. So here's to me telling this story over and over again. The mountain where I climbed, the valley where I fell, you were there all along. That's the story I'll tell. You brought the pieces together, made me that storyteller. Now I know it is well, it is well. That's the story I'll tell. That's the story I'll tell. Yeah, yeah. You hold the broken, you heal my every cry, every cry. My eyes are open, I know that it is well. Yeah, yeah. It is well. Oh, you hold the broken, you heal my every cry, every cry. And my eyes are afraid. My love is stronger, and I have promised to be always near. Don't be afraid, my love is stronger. My love is stronger than your fear. Don't be afraid, my love is stronger, and I have promised to be always near. Don't be afraid, my love is stronger. My love is stronger than your fear. Don't be afraid, my love is stronger, and I have promised to be always near. Don't be afraid, my love is stronger. My love is stronger than your fear. Don't be afraid, my love is stronger, and I have promised to be always near. And I have promised to be always near. And I have promised to be always
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. Good morning. Keenan, I'm going to, I'm Bishop Sutton here. I'm going to introduce you to our group. May we begin, Chris?
Absolutely, please do.
Okay. All righty. I'm still in the glow of the last session there with Kondwani. What a wonderful young man. We do want to use him in other occasions. And he referred to Erica Bridgeford again, who's familiar to some of us in the Sutton Scholars Program for high school students in Baltimore. And also in the Episcopal Diocese, we've taken the lead in forming the Baltimore Interfaith Coalition to dismantle racism, systemic racism in Baltimore area. And she is a mediator for us in that effort too. Look for those notices on how you can be a part of that. Well, now I'm going to introduce to you Keenan Keller. Keenan is the Senior Democratic Counsel for the Judiciary Committee of the U.S. House of Representatives. And it's that body that has entertained H.R. 40, that bill on reparations, a bill to which I spoke last year, the only religious leader who was asked to do so. In his capacity as the chief counsel there, he drafts and analyzes legislation on a wide range of issues, including civil rights, criminal and constitutional law questions. A graduate of Brown University and Yale Law School, he and his family live in Washington, D.C. and Mount Pleasant, where he's been active in and many city affairs there, the Advisory Neighborhood Commission, the Democratic State Committee, but also he served on the boards of the DC Urban Forest Council and Healthy DC Foundation in just a number of different ways. Especially for us as Episcopalians, you might want to know that their daughters, Claire and Lillian, are both graduates of National Cathedral School, and the family attends St. Patrick's Episcopal Church there in Washington. So Keenan, I am very happy to meet you virtually on this occasion, and he's going to talk with us today about on a national level and maybe what the church can do. What is the status of reparations at this point, and what can we do to make reparations a reality? Keenan Keller.
Good morning, everyone. I'm very glad to be here and want to thank Bishop Sutton again for testifying at our hearing of Juneteenth of 2019 on HR 40. HR 40 establishes a commission to study reparations proposals for African Americans and to make recommendations with respect to reparations. The commission has its historical basis in the 1980 Commission to Study Japanese Internment and follows on with the Civil Liberties Act of 1988, which established an apology and a payment of $20,000 per survivor of Japanese internment during World War II. The resolution, actually, it's a full bill. It's not a resolution. Was introduced in 1989 by Representative John Conyers following the passage of the Civil Liberties Act of 1988. And following its introduction, people were quite amazed and thought it was a far-fetched concept. But over time, and through the perseverance of Mr. Conyers and supporters at the grassroots level, HR 40 has gathered steam over the years, and now it has, I believe, 161 co-sponsors in the House. It has been introduced in the Senate by Senator Cory Booker and Senator Kamala Harris, and it was adopted in the Democratic National Committee's platform, and I believe 17 of 21 Democratic presidential aspirants stated that they supported or would sign HR 40 into law. So what started off as a concept in 1989 that people thought just could not possibly pass or could not possibly gain the support across the country, now polls at a level above 50% of Americans generally and 90% of Democrats. So HR 40's time has definitely come, but the movement for reparations traces back to 1897 with Callie House and the National Ex-Slave Mutual Relief Bounty and Pension Association. It continued to have support through the civil rights era and has been a consistent rallying cry for forward-thinking African Americans with respect to the state or the plight of African Americans in this country. One of the things that I think is most controversial about the concept of reparations to many is first that they can't really settle on an idea of what reparations means. And as our previous speaker talked about, there are many different schools of thought with respect to the movement for restorative or reparatory justice in this country. When you talk to one person, You won't get the same answer if you talk to 8 or 9 or 10 different other people, which is why Mr. Conyers, when he introduced this in 1989, and it's been taken up by Representative Sheila Jackson Lee of Houston, Texas, in this Congress, decided that it was necessary to start with a commission so that we could begin to address all of the different historical narratives and the historical myths that plague our country, and make it such a huge challenge to gain traction about this whole idea of equality. If you look back into the 1990s, when the concept of reparations started to take hold within the legal community, there were lawsuits brought against Wall Street firms, and most notably against Aetna and MetLife, alleging that they profited through their operations on slavery. And that litigation continued, and we finally obtained what are essentially settlements when MetLife and JP Morgan, for example, have created reparations funds. The introduction of the bill also spurred a real, I think, coming together about the impact of and the history of many institutions in the country. This was done within the Episcopal Church. This has been done within more than 40 universities across the country. My university, Brown University, has had its own reckoning with this and established its own program in 2003. Georgetown established its own programs. The University of Maryland has, for example, looked at its history around reparations also. I think the main issue that I think that we're trying to come to grips with as a country and as individuals is this whole question of the continuing impact of the transatlantic slave trade and personal responsibility or personal culpability, based upon a whole series of systemic and historic harms. If you go back and you look at the real sort of monetary impact of what we're talking about of the transatlantic slave trade, the value of unpaid labor by enslaved Africans in the United States is well more than $1 trillion. And for people who want to talk about reparations in the context of, payments or paying a check, the real financial impact of all of this is so large that that is a method of potentially trying to dismiss an important conversation with a triviality of trying to talk about this in terms of dollars and cents, especially when you're talking about lives and the continuing psychological impact that our previous speaker spoke about with respect to the levels of oppression that are continually leveled at African Americans in the country. When you look at things like the 1921 Tulsa race riot, which has gained a high degree of visibility in popular culture today, and then when you look at what happened in the lives of many people who are still living in the country today, these are things that are not historical. These are things that are within living memory. If you look at the level of discrimination that was evidenced by the structure of the Social Security system that excluded 75% of African Americans when it was launched as part of the New Deal. If you look at the GI Bill, which created the white middle class, the level of exclusion of African American soldiers, including my grand relatives, and how they were not able to obtain equal funds for housing or equal funds for education. You can actually see that economically, the engine that was created by the government post-World War II, excluding African Americans. And then when you look at economic disparities that exist today, it's not a deep mystery. It's not deep history. All of these things happen within the lives of people who are living, breathing members of our communities. So these aren't theoretical issues, but these are controversial issues in that they require us to take on the myths of our nation and how it was built and how it sustains itself. I think it's important that the Episcopal Church has taken a leadership role in moving this discussion forward. I think, and I'm very proud of the fact that my community of faith is willing to take on these difficult issues, and the church doesn't shrink from difficult issues. And today's program, I think, is important in highlighting the history and continuing challenges within our community or within our communities, writ large. As I said, I worship at St. Patrick's, and we have, at the outreach and at the church community level, conversations about how we allocate time, talent, and treasure. How on a liturgical level, how we discuss these, quite frankly, controversial issues within our community. And it's not necessarily an easy thing, but I think it's very important that we continue to do so. The fact that communities of faith are taking leadership in these areas, in these social justice conversations, and specifically around reparations, has been an important factor in allowing states like California to pass its own version of HR 40. Having cities like Evanston, Illinois, or Asheville, North Carolina, having them pass their own reparations programs to address the history of their localities. That has, I think, changed where we are in the country right now with respect to how we begin to address these issues. And I think that moving forward, we will see continued activity at the congressional level, on HR 40. As a Democratic staffer, I can say that I hope that we can actually bring HR 40 to the floor, for a vote in the House. Steny Hoyer, a proud Marylander, went on record after our hearing in 2019 that HR 40 should have a vote. And given the fact that we do have support in the Senate, behind the leadership of Senator Booker, that one day it's our great hope that we actually can put this on the president's desk, and we have a president who will sign this, so that the commission can begin to do the important work of having these difficult discussions around the country, so that we can have the kind of reckoning that's necessary to begin to address so many of the systemic issues that are plaguing our country, and that finally we can be one America. And that's really what Representative Conyers had in mind when he introduced the legislation, that we needed to take on myths so that America could live up to its creed, and that all the people who've taken to the streets here in the last year can see that there's a level of seriousness that is necessary to root out so many of the problems of division that we have in our nation right now.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Keller, for that. We do have some questions. I'm going to pose a couple to you to begin with. When we talk about reparations, people are always thinking, oh, this is for something that happened hundreds of years ago, but what about today? And last month, Citigroup, including Citibank, Citi credit cards and all that, they attempted to quantify the economic impact of systemic racism today. And they arrived at a figure, $16 trillion. They said that racism in the US has cost the US over the last 20 years, not in the distant past, but over the last 20 years, 16 trillion. Black workers have lost 113 billion in potential wages over the past 2 decades because they couldn't get a college degree. I'm just reading a couple of things from that study. The housing market lost 218 billion in sales because Black applicants couldn't get home loans. And about 13 trillion in business revenue never flowed into the economy because Black entrepreneurs couldn't access bank loans. So, and they've said finally that the US could have $5 trillion more in gross domestic product over the next 5 years if those gaps were closed today. So when we talk about reparations and infusing money into the impoverished Black community, it's not really addressing just injustices in the past, but in the present. Do you agree?
I wholeheartedly agree. And that doesn't include the individual psychological impacts of discrimination on a continuing basis. We've actually talked about this issue at the congressional level before when we looked at the issue of discrimination against Black farmers. That was the Pigford litigation. And one of the things that ultimately happened that I think broke the logjam around Pigford was when Southern Republican members of Congress realized that if you fairly allowed money to flow into the African-American farm economy, that actually benefited their entire local economy. And when they realized the economic effect of this, it was like a light bulb went off, and then the opposition quite quickly faded away. And then when another Republican member of Congress attempted to slow down the appropriation of funds for the Pigford settlement, it was actually Southern Republicans who turned and opposed his measure, saying, no, you don't understand the economic impact that this will have on our communities. We're going to vote this down, or you need to withdraw this. And that I think is really, point in fact, what we're talking about. But I think the real problem with it, and it's important for, Wall Street, Fortune 100 firms to, do this kind of work intellectually, is that there are so many people who don't believe that discrimination is real. Okay. And even if they believe that it is real, they want to dismiss it as a historical artifact, or they just don't want to talk about it. And that is one of the key problems, that we have at this point. It was like the death of George Floyd, the murder of George Floyd forced people to look at the facts and to confront a reality, very much in the same way that seeing dogs and fire hoses turned on little Black children in Birmingham, Alabama, forced America in the 1960s to confront a harsh reality that they would rather ignore. And that is discrimination and racism are real. Their continuing effects are real. They have economic, they have psychological, they have social impact. And until we do the hard work of addressing those root cause issues, our society is going to continue to suffer for it. I'm glad that Citigroup is beginning to take these issues on and take on this history, because until more well-placed corporations and individuals do this, we're not going to improve the plight of our communities.
Keenan, also, I'm trying to think if you were a white person who hasn't done that well in this economy, and they're talking to you with your Ivy League education, And they'll say Bishop Sutton and I did doctoral work at Princeton, ABD, and you've made it, I've made it. We've had Obama as president. We have so much going on now. We may have an African-American vice president. Why should I pay you money? If a white person looking at me or you, and they're saying, does reparations mean that I have to take money out of my pocket and give it to you?
There are so many different ways to approach that conversation. I'm actually a native Southerner. And one of the conversations that I can constantly have with my parents, with my father when he was still alive, was to discuss with them how far they actually progressed during my lifetime and how much things have changed. But they actually would remind me that so many things haven't changed. The history of white resentment in the South was one that was rooted in violence. So when someone actually says something like that in a modern day setting, I remember my parents' stories about poor Blacks and poor whites in the South, where Blacks had to literally hide the fruits of their economic labors because it put them physically at risk. It put their safety at risk. So those kinds of conversations have threatening, antecedents rooted in racial violence. In many ways, I don't buy the exceptionalism that people will try to apply to certain African Americans, or the Michael Jordans, or the Charles Barkleys, or the Reverend Suttons, or even the Keenan Kellers, because what we're really talking about is that there is no way to divorce the current plight of my life or the standards in my life from any other African American. Or as someone once said, I can't remember who said this, is that doesn't matter. If Michael Jordan were trying to hail a cab on a dark, rainy night in Manhattan, all they'd see was a Black man. And they weren't going to say, oh, it's Michael Jordan, I have to stop my cab. And so, all of us are no better than the least of us. And it's a difficult issue to have, and this is true, I think a true fact, for white America to confront the impact of its patriarchy. Okay, because in the rural South, the patriarchy was equally ruthless in its oppression of Blacks and poor whites. And it was only the concept of whiteness and white supremacy that separated poor whites from Blacks. And so they clung to it because it was all that they had. And that was the danger of racial violence. And we see so much of that going on right now. So when someone says, oh, we need to look at the wages or the negative impact of white supremacy on Black people or people of color, you also have to look at it equally on the impact of white supremacy on the white community and poor whites, because all of this oppression is rooted in fear, and that fear is dangerous, and that fear continues to separate our communities to this day. People want to exploit that fear for their own political and economic means. And I hope that one day we find a way to address and attack and eliminate that fear. And I think that that's why it's so important for communities of faith to be able to address these kinds of issues, to attack, to deconstruct that fear that divides us.
Yes. And I'll address one more question to you before I go to the chat box. For the church, the Diocese of Maryland in particular, we look at this as a spiritual issue, a spiritual moral issue. There are lots of facets to this: legal, political, financial, and we know of those costs, but there's also a spiritual cost that we've said, rooted in the fact of something was stolen, something was taken away. And what we've learned, and I know you've learned in Sunday school, and we all have, is that if you steal something from someone or a group of people, and you don't pay it back or make some attempt at restitution, what do you expect to happen? How do you hope to achieve reconciliation, a healthy relationship, if there's something that was left, something was stolen? And so the question is, what are you going to do about the fact that there was theft? And how are you going to begin to think, how can we address that? So for us, it's a spiritual issue. And I guess, I know that you are a member of St. Patrick's as well. And I know this is hard for Congress to talk about in the political realm, about this spiritual matter. I tried last year in talking about the souls of white folk and all that, and that got twisted into, oh, Bishop Sutton doesn't believe that white people are going to heaven unless they support reparations, which is a complete misread. But I don't know if you can speak at all, and what are the prospects of someone just saying morally or spiritually, emotionally, there is cost as well, and spiritually we need to do something about it.
So one of the interesting things that happens, especially in our committee, because we deal with so many issues that are beyond dollars and cents, is that members on both sides will constantly refer to their faith. And sometimes they will, use their faith as a sword to attack the positions of other members, which I've always found very curious. The difficult part about this conversation around HR 40 and around reparations or reparatory or restorative justice is the moral component that you just talked about. I think the reason that people want to try and dismiss HR 40 or reparations as a dollars and cents issue is that they're very uncomfortable talking about the whole issue of moral accountability, which is at base where the conversation starts. The whole idea of a national debt, an original sin of slavery, the necessity of atonement is, I think, makes people very uncomfortable. But you also have to reflect back on the myth of the Civil War. And it was the myth that the war was fought to, quote, free the slaves, and that the country was baptized in the blood of all of the Union and Confederate soldiers who died to reunite it. And that myth is one that we continue to wrestle with today, because what happened post-Reconstruction really showed that the country quickly snapped back to its concept of discrimination, oppression, and white supremacy. And so to the extent that Reconstruction did not rebuild the country post this baptism of blood of the Civil War, then what are we talking about? What are the components of this conversation that we're going to have? And so when John Conyers introduces HR 40 and says, we have to have a discussion, we have to have a commission examine all of this history, and then the country has to begin to atone first. It has to recognize the damage that was done, admit to it, and then we can go on, is a profoundly difficult legislative effort. It's actually one that is rooted deeply in faith, that is sometimes explicitly, referred to at a political level, but, and many times is an implication upon which so much policy is based. So I think we're going to have to continue to wrestle with this, and as this legislation moves forward, you'll find many more of these conversations or statements about faith and atonement and forgiveness and repair, and it's profoundly difficult and profoundly uncomfortable, but absolutely utterly necessary to address the issues that are driving so many people to the streets post George Floyd. And it doesn't matter who wins on Tuesday, this effort is going to have to continue, and it will continue. The question is whether we can find a way of unifying ourselves and rebuild some concept of equality and cohesiveness around so many difficult issues.
Yes, thank you. And so some of the questions that are coming through, there are a couple about the medical field. Merrick Moses has written, when we talk about reparations, are we also thinking about the history of medical exploitation of Black people? And also Hugh Davies in Southern Maryland, he talks about the disparities there, and to acknowledge that there are significant inequities in healthcare here in Southern Maryland. And they're both talking about if we can get medical institutions to also step up, knowing that that steps toward reparation and reconciliation can begin when we acknowledge the continuing health inequities as well. I don't know if you have a brief comment about that.
Yes, the issue of reparations and restorative justice is one that is broad and goes across virtually every professional field of endeavor. The issue of medical exploitation, healthcare disparities, these are all important conversations that we need to engage in, especially in and during the COVID pandemic. If you look at the kinds of chronic illnesses that exist in the African American community that are actually connected to the period of enslavement, these are scientific connections that have been made. It's important to know and for people to recognize that this is another piece of evidence that shows that the continuing impact of the slave trade and the enslavement of African Americans, that you have to look at every level or every aspect of life in this nation, because slavery encompassed everything. It was chattel, ownership, control. And when you look at everything from a person's psychological, physical, economic, educational health, all of these issues are critical, and they're all part of that discussion.
Okay. And then a couple of questions about HR 40 itself. And again, that bill is to establish a commission. It's not to say we're going to do reparations. It's to establish a commission to study and make recommendations. Well, both Scott Slater and Marjorie Forster and others are wondering maybe what the church can do. Maybe two questions. One, you've already mentioned that you expect that this is going to be getting more play in the future, especially if there's a blue sweep, a blue wave. But can the church really make an impact on how legislators will be voting on this? And what can we do?
So there are both direct and indirect ways that the church can have an impact on the future of HR 40 and its legislative trajectory. I think the first way is by leading by example, which you've already done. The Episcopal Church has taken positions around HR 40 and restorative justice issues. And so that's, making a direct statement at a political level. But also the other direct way of doing this is by setting up your own programs at a diocesan level. I think it's very important that the diocese is leading its own effort to examine its own history and to begin to address its own history. And I think as faith-based institutions do this as a matter of their own mission, it shows the federal government what can be done. It's the same way it's important that the state of California set up a reparations commission, an HR 40 type commission. It's important in the same way that Asheville and Evanston have set up their own commissions and are implementing programs to actually demonstrate at a political level what's actually possible. At the federal level, we like to say that the states and localities are incubators of what can be done. By having all of the state and local and private entities, putting together their own programs, engaging in their own studies, directly attacks the objection that this is impossible, or this is an effort that is too broad or too deep to even take on. But I also think at an indirect level, it's important for churches and religious institutions to talk about the responsibility of individuals and acting morally and ethically within their communities. I think it's important for legislators who want to say, oh, I have a strong sense of faith, to actually be able to look at their own religious institutions and to see what their religious institutions are doing. We always say that the Episcopal Church bats well above its weight class in Congress, and I think that that's very true. And so when the church adopts policies and policy statements and then forwards those, that level of leadership has both a direct and indirect impact on, at a legislative level, and especially when you're looking at something like, HR 40, which is fundamentally different from most legislation that members actually, encounter. Getting those kinds of messages, seeing those kinds of examples playing out in their communities, and right down to their faith communities, I think has an important impact.
Yes. Well, and then a couple of questions about other communities as well. We hear sometimes that, well, if we do this for African Americans or the African American impoverished community, what about other so-called minorities? What about other groups? What about Native Americans whose lands were taken from them? And what about poor whites in this western part of our diocese who were raked over in so many ways, especially by the coal industry and other policies? And then even Michael Wynn was talking about an experience he had in Africa and Ghana, where someone saying, yes, they should pay reparations to African Americans, but what about the exploitation in other ways of the African continent? So what do you have to say to that? Why should we focus on African Americans when other groups are aggrieved as well?
So the wonders of Dr. King's message during the golden age of civil rights and his harkening back to Gandhi was the fact that he framed his values, his ethics in addressing oppression. And so when he said, injustice, anywhere, oppression anywhere, is injustice or oppression, everywhere, sort of expanding his quote. And so if you look at the impact of addressing civil rights and equality issues for African Americans in the 1960s, what my grandparents and parents, marched for, it improves the plight of everyone. Okay, so when you decide to take on, as a matter of an ethical principle, restorative justice for one group, it naturally will expand to other groups. Now, when you start talking about the Native American community, I mentioned the Black farmers litigation, Pigford. Well, there's the Native American issue, and that was the Keepseagle litigation, which had a $20 billion settlement. There is restorative justice in the agricultural area that also addressed Asian American farmers and the Latino farming community. So yes, once you actually open the door to resolving issues of equality, then you're going to have to address that fully. The only response to that is to say, well, if you don't want to do this, you need to stay quiet. You need to step back and you need to sit back. And I think, as we've seen in the past months, that's no longer a real option. These conversations need to happen on a national level. And once you start having those conversations, you out of necessity will need to have a fulsome conversation.
Yes. Well, thank you. And then maybe one last question. I forget who it was who raised it up in the chat, or Herschel Wade, that United Nations has also declared that the United States owes African Americans reparations. Mm-hmm. I think I know the answer to this, but do you think that the fact that the world community would want the US to do this would have any effect on our elected officials?
Well, it depends upon which elected officials you're talking to. One party typically likes to engage in world-based multilateral solutions, and another one doesn't so much. It's interesting to see what U.S. participation does or doesn't mean, at the international and UN level. Currently, we are in the UN decade of the African diaspora. And the difficult part about that is that the United States, for a whole series of reasons, has not participated. And as a result of the lack of participation by the United States, the UN decade itself has not reached its full potential. Our hope is that we will, in an upcoming administration, we will be able to re-engage with the UN, and so that we can make the UN decade have a much stronger finish than it has had thus far. But when the United States doesn't get involved, then when you start looking at issues both hemispherically and around the issues around the transatlantic slave trade, you end up getting a difficult and distorted message about what happens. If you go back into the Durban Durban session that we had in 2001, and the United States actually pulled out of Durban. And even though that has been 19 years ago, and we didn't fully participate in the Durban Declaration, that continues to have effect. So we need to figure out some way of more fully engaging in this process, because again, by not fully engaging in Durban, not fully engaging in the UN decade, going back to a previous question, we're not able to address so many of these different issues that exist for us hemispherically. We're not able to engage with Africa or the Caribbean or our European partners around these issues, but we're trying to do it, but I think we need to be more intentional about that process.
Yes. Well, Keenan, thank you so much, Keenan Keller, for this. We were very lucky and blessed to have you as the senior counsel on the Judiciary Committee to address us on these issues today. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I think you've enlightened us in so many ways, and we pray for you and for your work to continue there. Before we close, just a few more thoughts about what the Diocese of Maryland is doing. The entire Episcopal Church is not on board yet, but we're getting there. And our diocese really took a lead on this when we took that vote last year to affirm the principle of reparations. And why did we do that again? Because it just didn't sit well with us to know that so much of what we've gained financially and materially came from evil means. And so in all of this discussion, it's not just on an individual basis. Well, so-and-so made it and so-and-so did not. But as our first speaker spoke to, and you as well, Mr. Keller, there are millions of African Americans who are stuck in communities where there are few jobs, no good housing, no good education, no good health care, no realistic opportunities for uplift, and it's not their fault. That's the way the system was designed. That's why reparations for us means how can we invest in those communities? Not the giving of checks from white people to Black people, but how can this institution and this generation say we were complicit and now we're going to atone for that? And so finally, it speaks to issues of shame. What African Americans notice is that when reparations, so-called reparations, were given to those Japanese who were interned in camps in the 1980s, there was not a great public outcry against that. Oh, we can do that. But we've noticed when you say now for African Americans, now it's we can't do that. And it speaks to issues of our national shame. And it goes to the heart of it. And until we also address that, knowing that the nation maybe doesn't want to talk about reparations because they don't want to be reminded of a national shame. We have to talk about, we know a way out of shame. This is not about guilt. This is about responsibility. So thank you all, and thank you, Mr. Keller. And I'm going to turn this over to the Reverend Deacon Lauren Welch, who I think is going to pray us and dismiss us out from this session.
Go ahead, Lauren.
Let us pray. Holy, compassionate wisdom, grant us a vision of our nation and our world as your divine love would have it. A nation and a world where the weak are protected and none are hungry or poor. A nation and world where the riches of creation are shared and everyone enjoys them. A nation and a world where diverse races and cultures live in harmony and mutual respect. A nation and a world where peace is built with justice and justice is guided by your love. Holy wisdom, dwell in our hearts and souls, inspiring us with courage to create this your dream of a friendly world of friendly folks beneath a friendly sky through following the way of Jesus. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. God bless you all. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Gray. Thank you all who put this program together. Chris, do you have a final word?
Just thank all of you, and most especially our Truth and Reconciliation Commission, who continue to work very hard to offer programs throughout the diocese to keep us mindful and engaged and educated around the sin of racism, around the issue of race and class, and all those things that keep us separate. So please participate when you can, join the TRC, join other reading groups that'll happen. And we're just so appreciative of you and your support and your engagement. Gray, do you have anything? So peace be with all of you and be well. Take care.